especially during exam week. I know it's a busy time, but we're really excited to be here and to hear about Mia's research. My name is Emily O'Brock, and I'm the Romance, Languages, and Literature Librarian here at UChicago. And this quarter, I had the absolute pleasure of supervising Mia Krueger, our Banned Books Graduate Student Research Fellow. Mia and I met weekly throughout the 10-week quarter to discuss her findings in this research and her progress and to kind of put all the pieces together. But the subject and the desire to do this project came entirely from Mia. And it's really just been great to work with such a bright and lovely student. In addition to this presentation, Mia is also drafting an article on her findings that we hope to see published one day to get it out there to the public. So I'll leave it to Mia to tell you about her project, but before I pass it over to her, I just want to say a few words about the context of this project and the broader efforts of the library, namely through the Banned Books Initiative. There we go. This project was launched in 2023 in the context of increased book bans in school and public libraries. We as librarians saw this as we see it as an alarming trend and wanted to do something to combat it, to make these books available for the public. So there are three aims to this project. First, collection building. We are aiming to build a complete collection of recently banned and challenged books so that they're available not only to UChicago, but to the larger community. So we've got them all in one spot where anyone who's looking for it can find it. So far, we've collected around 2,200 titles that have been added to our collection. And also another 1,300 ebooks are available through the Palace app, which is part of the Lyricist project. Secondly, we are aiming to support research on book bans and challenges. So Mia's project is one piece of this, and we've got some other stuff coming down the line. But as we're adding these books to our collections, they're also getting cataloged in such a way that you can search for them in our library catalog and find out information about them that way. And we're looking for ways and working on things to expand these efforts. And thirdly, we are engaging in community education and outreach about book bans and challenges. So we have tabled at various UChicago events and events in the larger community to get the word out about what's going on and why it's dangerous and why we should all care about it. And this presentation is part of that effort as well. So Mia is taking part, especially in the second two aims of this initiative. And for more information, you can follow this link or we have a QR code. I'll let it pause on that for just a second if anyone is looking to get an image. And this meeting is being recorded and will be available later, so you can come back to the recording to get the QR code. All right. So in terms of what this program will look like, we've had the introductions. Mia is going to spend around 20 minutes presenting her research, and then we'll have a discussion with Mia and I about the process of the research and her aims in doing this research. And then there will be an opportunity for the audience to ask questions. And in order to do this on Zoom, if you go to your little toolbar at the bottom, there's it's three little dots in a circle that says more. If you click on that, there's a Q&A function if you don't already have it in there. And we ask that you use the Q&A function to ask questions. And you can pop them in there as you think of them. It's not going to make a noise or disrupt the presentation. So yes, that will be available at the end of the program. So without further ado, take it away, Mia.
Alrighty. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for taking the time this morning to listen and engage with my research. I'm grateful to the library for the opportunity to pursue a topic I'm so passionate about and bring my social work perspective to the work. And just before I start, everyone can hear me okay? Great. All right. A little bit about me before we start. I'm currently pursuing my MSW at the University of Chicago's Crown School of Social Work Policy and Practice, having just completed my first year. Before this, I earned my undergraduate degree from the University of Denver, majoring in psychology and double minoring in art and sustainability. While in Denver, I also spent significant time working with survivors of domestic violence and people experiencing homelessness. I have a strong interest in working with trauma survivors and plan on working as an art therapist after obtaining my MSW. I'm a strong advocate of the arts, and I believe that everyone deserves to have the opportunity to be understood, represented, and empowered, whether that be through finding connection in literature or other forms of creative expression. So, for the purpose of this research, examining the relation book bans have on LGBTQ plus students is important because of the large number of LGBTQ plus and BIPOC books currently being challenged and banned. In 2023, over 40% of banned books featured LGBTQ plus themes or characters, and this is striking given that only 3% of young adult literature is considered to be queer. Given these numbers and the fact that queer students outside higher education are among the most vulnerable, facing high rates of harassment, bullying, and suicide attempts, the need to examine this relationship was clear to me. Therefore, I came up with my central question of inquiry. What are the long-term impacts of book banning in the Southern United States on queer youth, particularly in relation to academic outcomes, mental health, and community attitudes? Also, before we begin, I want to acknowledge that today's presentation will address sensitive topics such as suicide, mental health, harassment, and bullying. Please prioritize your well-being, and if you find these topics distressing, feel free to step away and revisit this recording at a future time. So, like Emily had mentioned before, over the past 10 weeks, we met and I conducted a systematic review of literature and peer-reviewed studies on book banning and related anti-LGBTQ plus policies and their impacts on queer youth in education and beyond. This review was also supplemented by face-to-face interviews with key stakeholders, including queer advocates, librarians, and authors. Using both literature and interviews, I conducted a qualitative thematic analysis to discuss the possible long-term implications of anti-LGBTQ plus policies and book bans for queer students across the United States. For the interviews, I used purposive sampling by contacting individuals in my existing network. This resulted in 5 interviews with people from the queer community, literary advocates, and those concerned with representation. My first interview was with Brandy Green, a children's book author and LCSW psychotherapist. Brandy provided important insights into the critical value of representation in children's literature, a concept that inspired her to create a children's book that reflects her unique identity as an African American with albinism. Brandy illuminated the detrimental effects of representation gaps in children's literature, helping family and community members better understand unique identities and foster greater acceptance within society at large. The second interview I completed was with Melissa Ballos, who's currently a social sciences librarian at Tulane University, but has previously worked at Morehouse University, an HBCU, and Florida International University. Melissa highlighted the vital importance of fostering environments of acceptance, affirmation, and safety for intersectional students, particularly in times of intense political action and oppression. My next interview was with Joshua Burford, the co-founder and co-executive director of Invisible Histories, a queer archive library and nonprofit based in the Deep South. Josh was an incredibly pivotal inclusion in this research, sharing his own perspectives and stories of growing up queer and teaching queer literature in Alabama. The last 2 interviews I conducted were with Erin Bell of Gerber Hart Library in the Uptown neighborhood of Chicago and Holiday Vega, the librarian for health, psychology, and social work at the University of Chicago's Crown School of Social Work Policy and Practice. Erin highlighted the importance of queer representation and discussed the archival work at Gerber Hart, as well as the incredible impact the library has had on patrons, including some visiting from states away. Holiday rounded out my interviews with an informative discussion on how banned and censored materials can sometimes incentivize some younger people to seek them out, fostering resilience through curiosity about the forbidden. So for the sake of time, I'll go a little bit more in depth for just 2 of the interviews I conducted, and those will be the ones with Joshua Burford and Melissa Ballos. Joshua was a pivotal interview, one of the few conducted in the South during this project. He shared his experience growing up queer in Alabama and finding deep connections in books that still resonate with him today. He recalled discovering Armistead Maupin's Tale of the City in his college library and reading all 6 books in just 1 week, sitting on the floor between the bookshelves, completely enraptured. This was one of the first times he saw queer characters he could relate to and inspire to emulate. He wanted the same friends, the same lives, and the same adventures. The stories broadened his horizons and showed him a life that he could pursue. Joshua's personal act of resistance is filling many library boxes in his community with queer books, hoping to inspire others as he once was. Melissa was also key in understanding representation in literature and the value of affirming communities. She shared insights on how reading stories with characters different from one's own makes individuals, regardless of identity, more empathetic and well-rounded. She illuminated what it looks like to be a student in an environment that is actively working against their existence, recounting some of her experiences with students after the 2024 political election. She also recounted childhood experiences of her own, in which educators took her books away, leaving her with feelings of confusion and irritation that has persisted to this day. She said her community fostered her creativity as well and taught her to fight against what she believed was wrong, shaping her into the fierce advocate that she is today. So these interviews were integral to this project because they provided the crucial human element needed. Talking face to face with advocates, authors, and those fighting to preserve targeted stories gave me a perspective beyond systematic analysis. Without people like Josh and Melissa, this project would feel incomplete and lack the crucial stories showing how literature impacts queer children and prepares young people for success in our diverse society. So having discussed the interviews, I now want to share some insights from my systematic analysis of existing literature. During the data collection to answer my research question, I examined 8 peer-reviewed articles, 2 national youth surveys, and 2 newspaper articles. The most prominent longitudinal studies informing my research were the annual mental health survey by the Trevor Project and the biannual school climate report by GLSEN. The Trevor Project has been running for 7 years and GLSEN for 27. Key findings from the 2024 Trevor Project report include 46% of queer youth saying that their schools were not gender affirming, 32% experiencing verbal assault and harassment, and 7% leaving school due to mistreatment. The 2025 GLSEN report echoed similar findings, with the majority of respondents reporting more hostile educational environments after the 2024 election, with 2/3 reporting feeling unsafe at school due to their identities, and more than 60% surveyed experiencing some level of harassment or abuse. I also analyzed several peer-reviewed studies from the CDC, Cedars-Sinai Hospital, and the American Journal of Public Health, among others. The CDC study used data from several years of their Youth Risk Behavior Survey, a biennial school-based survey that began in 1991. It found queer students faced higher risks of violence victimization and suicide than their heterosexual peers. The 2020 Cedars-Sinai and 2010 AJPH study examined negative impacts from limited representation, acceptance, and resources for queer people. Cedars-Sinai found that many non-binary and transgender individuals began experiencing gender dysphoria around the age of 7 and reported that earlier access to gender-affirming support could have prevented some of the trauma they later experienced in life. AJPH found that LGBTQ+ people living in states that banned same-sex marriage during the 2024 and 2025 years experienced significant increases in psychiatric, anxiety, and alcohol use disorders, while no changes were reported in queer respondents living in states where same-sex marriage remained legal. So as I have mentioned, the findings from the systematic analysis that I completed were focused on 3 main realms of inquiry: mental health outcomes of queer students, academic outcomes of queer students, and how community attitudes and therefore community treatment of queer students have been affected in relation to anti-LGBTQ+ policies. When examining mental health outcomes, LGBTQ+ students face more than double the mental health issues of their classmates. This is not because they're queer, but because of how societies and the communities around them treat them. The Trevor Project reports that 36% of young queer people seriously considered suicide in the last year, compared to about 13.5% of their heterosexual or cisgender peers, showing a 3 to 4 times higher rate for queer students. In contrast, students in identity-affirming educational environments, the opposite of schools with high rates of book bans, report lower rates of suicide, stronger senses of belonging, and deeper connection to their peers. Essentially, this research shows a strong positive correlation between safe, affirming educational and community environments and significantly better mental health in queer youth. The impact on academic outcomes was also alarming. Students had higher GPAs and attendance in environments supportive of their identities. Glissan's survey showed that about 32% of LGBTQ+ students miss at least one full month of school due to feeling unsafe or uncomfortable, compared to just 6 to 8% of their straight peers. Furthermore, the Trevor Project illuminated that around 49% of queer youth experienced bullying within the last year. Students who consistently experience bullying have a much harder time participating in their own education actively and meaningfully. Furthermore, the quality of education is impacted when certain narratives are banned. For the betterment of all students, queer, straight, and in between, the inclusion of diverse perspectives, histories, and stories is shown to improve cognitive skills, critical thinking skills, and better prepare students for joining a diverse and multicultural society after high school graduation. One of the most telling pieces of evidence for effects on community attitudes came from the 2025 Trevor Project survey, finding that 90% of young people recounted feeling stress and anxiety regarding recent politics compared to just around 66% 2 years prior. To give a perspective of what's currently happening on the ground, the Central Bucks School District in Pennsylvania, which has engaged in severe book banning recently, received a complaint from students, many of whom were queer, reporting harassment and bullying that made many feel unsafe at school, including one suicide attempt. School environments are directly affected by the policies that favor one group and oppress the other. This signals to students whose identities are considered valued and who's not as important. Such thinking also spreads into the community if it was not already present. Ty Kitchen, a queer advocate out of DC, even surmises that book bans themselves are part of a more insidious effort to undermine the acceptance of LGBTQ+ people within the next generation of young people, fostering a future with less acceptance globally. The political tide turning in more conservative direction is not only impacting the safety of our queer students, but is threatening their livelihoods, quality of living, and for some of them, their lives. So now that we've covered the research, I want to return to the central question. It can be safely surmised that clear trends showing global negative impacts for queer people, especially youth, related to policies like book banning, led by those unconcerned with their safety. While we cannot yet determine the actual long-term impacts of book banning, as it's a new concept without comprehensive research, we can agree that without full representation, queer students face significant risk. So the solution that I proposed, based on this research and conversations with queer advocates and librarians, is that there's no single remedy. Because this issue spans policy, government, local libraries, and schools, solutions must be comprehensive and address all of these levels. First, I propose top-down changes within the Department of Education. This process for book bans and challenges must change. Currently, in many districts, a challenged list of books is immediately removed from all the schools in the districts, sometimes before an official decision has even been made. This is new. Previously, parents could only decide for their specific child, not the entire district. The Department of Education needs stricter, more comprehensive oversight to hold specific districts accountable. At the campus level, policies should ensure that students can access the books they want if they're unavailable. This could mean outsourcing resources that provide more comprehensive libraries of literature, or offering online resources for students who cannot access the books they want physically. Schools must also protect queer students by holding students, teachers, and administrators accountable for harmful behavior. GSAs and designated safe spaces where queer students can find refuge need to be established if they don't already exist. Schools should also consider implementing gender-neutral bathrooms and gender-neutral uniforms. Community resistance is also a huge part of the solution, particularly in conservative areas. Josh Burford described filling public library boxes in Alabama with queer literature as his small act of resistance. Queer literary gatherings, book swaps, and funding archives like Invisible Histories and Gerber Hart help keep queer literature alive and accessible, where it's increasingly targeted. Doing so helps preserve books being taken off the shelves across the country and provide students with an accessible opportunity to read, enjoy, and see themselves in the stories depicted. At the local level, attending city hall gatherings or school district meetings to advocate for some of these changes is how they are made, and I encourage you to do so if you witness book banning occurring in your communities. When examining environments like we're in now, higher education, the University of Chicago's Banned Book Initiative is a fantastic example of preserving books that are being taken off shelves across the country and providing an accessible opportunity for students to read, enjoy, and see themselves in the stories depicted. Preservation is one of the most sustainable ways to keep these narratives in circulation and accessible to all that are interested. So, looking forward, the implications of this research indicate significant work remains to be done and that immediate action is required. With LGBTQ plus students already being vulnerable to higher rates of mental health challenges and suicide, it's our responsibility as educated, empathetic, and compassionate members of society to engage in the actions we can take to make a difference. The act of reading, especially stories that depict characters we can relate to, or even those who may not share our own identities but embody qualities we admire, is vital to fostering wonder, growth, and empathy. Stories allow us to reflect on our own lives, regulate our emotions, and problem solve issues in our current situations. Books play a crucial role in fostering robust cognitive and emotional development. Not only does reading a diverse collection of books provide representation, perspective, and understanding, but it also helps shape us into more thoughtful, well-rounded individuals. Books bring knowledge, connection, and humanity into our lives, and we must continue fighting for the freedom to access them. This is an issue that affects all of us, parents, children, educators, community members, and everyone in between. Protecting diverse literature means protecting the voices, experiences, and future generations to come and those who are already with us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mia. It's a really fascinating topic, and you've done so well explaining the connections between all of these different pieces you examined. So moving forward, it's time for us to have a discussion. I'm going to stop sharing a second. There we go. All right, so I have some questions for you, and I'm sure the audience is going to have some questions as well. But to get us started, what got you interested in pursuing this project on book bans and queer youth? So what was your point of entry into this?
Yeah, I feel like book banning has been a hot topic for a little while now, but what really opened my eyes to it was a private screening of the documentary The Librarians that the U Chicago Library put on at the end of last year that I attended. I didn't know the extent of what was going on until I watched that film, and it really inspired me. And I knew that I had to be involved in some capacity.
Fantastic. And that screening was part of the Banned Books Initiative, so
Yeah.
part of the community outreach piece. So it's the importance of outreach, getting folks interested. Did anything surprise you in the process of doing this research? Like, what was the most unexpected thing that you found?
Yeah, so to be totally candid, this is actually my first time conducting any sort of formal research. So this whole project was pretty surprising and unexpected in a lot of ways for me. But I loved it. It was a great opportunity, and I hope to continue other forms of research in my career because I was able to dive so deeply into a topic I was so interested in, and I learned so much. But I do think that the number one shocking fact for me that I learned was just the sheer volume of queer books being targeted, with only them making up like 3% of the actual zeitgeist of books that exist.
Yes, it's very clear that it's not because of offensive material or what I guess folks get offended by different things, but that it's very clear that this community is being targeted when it's such a small piece of the pie and such a large percentage of the bands. Yeah. Well, I'm glad you have. We were able to provide this opportunity for you to do this research, and yeah, it's exciting to see where this project might take you in the future.
Mhm.
So you've laid out some really great solutions to this extremely complex problem. but they're not entirely feasible with the current government, right? Like we can't control the laws as individuals. So given the challenges coming from the federal and local governments, what kind of approach should we take? Like what's the best thing that we can do as individuals to make a difference in our communities?
Yeah. Um, I think the first step is kind of examining where you are at and what your capabilities are in terms of showing up or donating. But I think donation is one of the most accessible forms of giving back or resistance. So donating to organizations that are fighting the fight in places with the most aggressive bans, like in the South or Pennsylvania or any other states. Honestly, there's a lot of states that are experiencing pretty severe book bans right now. So yeah, donating to those organizations is a great first start. And also, like I mentioned, like Josh does, filling those little local libraries with books that are being banned or queer books, any books that are being targeted really that aren't accessible for most children or people in those areas. I think it's a great form of just local resistance. And those libraries kind of exist everywhere. So that's also pretty accessible. And then if you are able, attending the city council or Department of Education meetings, if they're open to the public, is also a great form of resistance because you're getting bodies, faces, and stories in the spaces where the actual decisions are being made. And that is really important.
This is maybe I'm going to add a follow-up question to that. So, how do you convince, and it's maybe unfair because I didn't give you this one ahead of time, but in the context of showing up at these places and trying to make a difference by having your voice heard, how do you convince someone that's on the other side that maybe they should re-examine? Because if you're the only one showing up to a very, very conservative town hall meeting, um, I don't know. How do you convince other people that they should care about this and that we should be fighting this?
Yeah. I think sharing stories, tapping into empathy of the people that are making the decisions is always a really effective and convincing method. So, if you're able to bring along people that are directly being impacted to share their own stories or talk on their behalf and share what they've experienced, that would be my recommendation.
Yeah, because we all have that ability to empathize with others, and you just have to find a way to reach the person, right? But
Mhm.
on a personal level, sharing personal stories.
Exactly.
Thanks. Um, how did you go about conducting these interviews? So how did you find the subjects? How did you decide on questions? What were you hoping to find out? Can you tell us a little bit more about the process that went into the interview portion of this project?
Yeah. So when I began this research project, I was very excited about it. And I was talking to almost everyone in my life about it because I was so excited. And this actually ended up working out in my benefit because people started throwing out recommendations of people that I should talk to. And that kind of started the whole interview aspect of this work. The project actually wasn't going to originally include interviews, but then when I started getting recommendations and they just kept coming in, I was like, I think this is a really vital inclusion for this research. And it ended up working out like so well. I don't think this research could have been what it was without the interviews. So,
Yeah, what do you think they like added to the whole perspective? I know
oh yeah.
you've gone through this a little bit, like it made it more human, it gave you individual examples, but how did having those individual examples make you like rethink the project, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I will say I think when you're completing a systematic analysis, you're seeing the impacts because you're seeing the numbers that are being reported in these studies, but you're not hearing the individual stories or these experiences that people like all of those numbers are people and all of those numbers are people that have had experiences, but you don't get to have that element of their own experience through just a study. And I think that like I've said, the humanistic aspect of it is so crucial. Even with me being a social worker, I think that's what I intended to do with this research. I needed that, I think, to feel more connected to it as well. Um, so yeah, if that answers the question.
It does answer it. And I think it sort of tags on to the last question of how do you convince other people? How do you sort of activate empathy in them? And maybe it's less with statistics and like, well, this percentage of queer youth are in danger. And more of a like, my friend, my cousin, this person I talked to had this experience,
Mhm.
and this is how it impacted them. It's easier to connect with people on the individual level than on like to be like this whole population, right? Like statistics don't activate your emotions and your empathy in the same way that individual stories do, right?
Yeah,
So
exactly.
yeah, it definitely added in reading your research and in conducting this project with you, it really sort of changed the way we looked at it, right? And gave a different perspectives on the issue.
Mhm.
All right, thanks. Um, this project was quite ambitious for 10 weeks, right?
Yeah.
Like figure out how this all fits together. You've done a great job turning it into a coherent project in for a 10 week project and synthesizing the material. But if you were to continue with this project with a longer timeline and unlimited resources and time, what would you like to look into next and how would you expand it?
Yeah, I think one of the crucial elements that I would have loved to have included into this project was actual stories and oral histories from students themselves. Of course, with the time limit that I was given, it just wasn't feasible. And then there's also like um, consent issues with parents and stuff like that when you're trying to interview students. So that just would have been a larger element of it, but that would have, I think, really added to this research. Um, yeah, and also in a perfect scenario, I would have loved to interview those students and then potentially also circle back 6 months after or another 6 months after to see if anything had changed in their own personal experiences after maybe some implementations or whatever it may be, just circling back to see if there were actually any changes being made.
Maybe for the future, in
Yeah,
your
exactly.
career when you're done with graduate school and you're in the workforce. But yeah, I think it's a project that can make a great deal of impact. It's such an important issue, and yeah, you've done a great job for a 10-week project.
Thank you.
Finally, you are preparing to become a social worker to get out and help people. How do you think this research has informed your future career as a social worker, and what will you take away from this experience and bring into your future work as a social worker?
Yeah. I feel like this research just taught me how important representation is for marginalized individuals in a society that is so heteronormative and honestly institutionally racist. And I think that I will be informed for the rest of my career because of the perspective that this research has given me. So, yeah, I think that was really important. And yeah, just highlighted that. And then also due to my interest in working with individuals who have experienced trauma, being able to provide a affirming, safe, and empowering space is a crucial part of their healing journey. And that's also something that was vital for queer students across this study. So just seeing that being in relation to that, I think there's, yeah, just a connection. And then I think also doing this research in general made me kind of reflect on my own reading habits and made me realize that I think I need to diversify my reading a little bit. And I was just getting a lot of recommendations from some of the people that I interviewed about books that had really left an impact on them, and I had never read them. So I think that's something that I'm gonna set out to do after this research is done.
So you've taken on a new reading list for the
Yeah,
summer. You've got
exactly.
your beach reading is all organized.
Exactly. And maybe I can check them out from the Chicago Library.
Yeah, we probably have them. So come use the collection.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think we're going to open it up to questions from the audience. Let me get into the Q&A here to see what we have. All right. So our first question, what gaps in information did you find most impactful in your research? I'm curious how the current political state will impact the continuation of research to address gaps and possibly widen existing gaps in knowledge. So what gaps did you find in the knowledge and how do you think like the government is going to, if like a lack of research, the impact of a lack of research to fill these gaps or lack of
Yeah.
to fill them?
I mean, I will say there is quite a lot of research that exists out there on mental health impacts of queer youth across America. So that wasn't really something that I experienced a lack of. But since book banning itself has really increased in the last few years, just in the last like 5 years, honestly, to the level that we're seeing today, there is very limited research on the effects of book banning in general. So I think that was a very large gap where I kind of had to supplement with like the interviews like I we had mentioned, and then also just with the surveys and all of that to kind of tie together and find a cohesive narrative.
Yeah, I would say if I can chime in, that was sort of the challenge of this project, right, Mia? That like there's tons and tons of studies on the importance of representation, and there's tons and tons of statistics and studies on where these book bans are happening, and it was putting those two pieces together. There's
Yeah,
not a lot of research that is like the overlap of those two things, but the connection is very clear because
yeah,
books are one form of representation.
yeah.
If you're a queer teenager and you're looking for a book that shows queer, like a young adult book that shows these stories, and you can't find it because they've all been banned, like that's a problem. In these formative years where you're looking for people that you can relate to in the media that you consume, in the books that you're reading, yeah, so to take away that one form of representation, it's clear that it's part of this larger impact of lack of representation. But not a lot of work has been done to explicitly make that link. And so that's
Yeah.
sort of where this project was and yeah, we're trying to connect those dots, right?
And hopefully there's more research that's being done in like the next 10 to 15 years. I'd
Yeah.
hope. Yeah.
Yeah, hopefully. I mean, it's an up and coming thing and maybe it's not going to come from the government, but we've got researchers out there who really care about this. All right, next from Kathleen. Um, there has been great discussion on the personal or emphatic appeal to those on the opposite side. So, what are your thoughts on the arguments to be made for constitutional rights, the universal danger of suppressing free speech? And do you think that emphasizing the danger of this, regardless of personal prejudice, can be effective? So, yeah, the role of free speech in all of this.
Yeah.
Mia, if you want to see it written out, you can also go to those three dots at the bottom of the
Okay.
screen.
I think that that is one of the most prominent arguments that it's being used in defense of book banning as well. I don't know if that was the indication of the question, but um, yeah, censorship of stories and narratives and honestly bodies of work is an infringement of the First Amendment. But then, yeah, it's interesting because yeah, that's all I have to say on that.
Yeah, I'm looking to see. Yeah, yeah, free speech, making and there's a difference between making these books available and like if a parent doesn't want their kid to read young adult literature with queer characters, then they can tell their kid you can't read that. They don't have to
Yeah,
make it not available for every kid that's around. But yeah, I think the First Amendment is being used on as a kind of on both sides, right? But
yeah. I was gonna mention that. Yeah, it's interesting to see the different use of it on both sides. Um, but like you were saying before as well, the previously when books were being challenged or banned in districts, like I'd mentioned, it was only a parent being able to do it for their very specific individual child. But now, because of, from what I understand, because of increasingly, I think fear in a lot of school districts of funding being cut or something around those lines, they are kind of jumping the gun in terms of book banning and removing it from all districts just to kind of save face in a way. Um, so yeah, kind of getting back to a space where parents can do it for their individual child, I think is also staying true to the First Amendment in a way as well.
yeah. All right, next we have, I appreciate your perspective as a social worker contributing to this project. Are there other professional voices you think are important to this area of research? It's a great question. We were looking into a lot of different like areas where Mia could conduct interviews and yeah, take it away, Mia.
Yeah. Um, Initially, I was interested in getting the perspectives of some mental health therapists that specialized in queer youth, and then also gender affirming medical providers, I think, or we were planning on it, but just didn't end up working out. That would have been a really interesting inclusion to see their perspectives on witnessing what's going on in that sphere of study, and then also with their clients and patients themselves. So that would have been a very interesting inclusion, or just more research done in those fields on this topic too. Could be very interesting.
I can ask a follow-up to that, Mia. What do you think that might add to like what you've discovered in this research? Because we've talked about educational outcomes, mental health outcomes. Obviously, a therapist that is a specialist in that area would be able to give a different perspective on the mental health outcome. Do you think there may be a like physical health outcome?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, yeah, your physical health is completely tied to your mental health for almost everybody.
Stress levels.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, everything is so interconnected. One thing usually affects everything else. So I could definitely see some physical health attributes coming into play, maybe in the long term, of these individuals existing in environments that are increasingly so hostile and oppressive. Um, but yeah, I think the inclusion of those perspectives too could have rounded out this research in a really interesting way and made it very robust and kind of getting all of those perspectives and spheres of study in one like concise space. So that could have been a really cool inclusion.
Him into conversation. Well, we can file that away in the, future projects to expand this. Right. Okay, a question from Kaylin. Your interest in art therapy is wonderful. I wonder what direction arts-based research might take you. Could you share how you might apply that lens to this work?
Yeah. I think I mentioned it a little bit earlier, but just fostering environments of safety and empowerment is incredibly important for any sort of therapeutic practice, especially art therapy. Um, in when conducting art therapy with clients, you always want them to feel very comfortable to express themselves in any way that they need to. So, yeah. Sorry, I lost my train of thought.
But do you think that art therapy could be used in terms of like increasing representation and that kind of stuff? Maybe that's more the question.
Oh,
Like how
okay.
to use art therapy to help the outcomes of these students?
Yeah. I think art therapy is incredibly helpful for pretty much anybody that's interested in a mental health journey or finding healing in some way. And it is incredibly helpful also for youth. So yeah, I definitely think that it could be implemented in some schools. I do see a lot of art therapists going into schools and middle schools, high schools, and doing classes with students. So I think that absolutely it could overlap in that way.
And maybe help the students like develop creative expression that they may use to make new examples of children's books and things like that,
True. Yeah.
to increase representation of identities that they are part of.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Do we have any other questions? Give the audience a second. So anything else about the project you'd like to share, Mia? Anything else to add?
Yeah. Yeah, this research was incredibly impactful. I will carry it with me and it will inform my future therapeutic career and just the way that I operate as a human throughout the rest of my life. There's, I learned so much, especially on a topic that I was already interested in, but I feel like I'm very much an expert in talking about this now, which is great. And yeah, I'm just excited to see kind of how it pops up in my future as well and how it informs other spheres of practice and conversations with individuals.
Yeah, and I think we have a lot of students that are really interested in this topic at U Chicago. And
Mhm.
that's something that the Banned Books Initiative has not. I mean, we've engaged with students, but I think moving forward, it'd be a good thing to get some students involved in the initiative as well. We
Yeah.
have another question. So you mentioned the possibility of publishing your findings. Where might we find that, and how is the project moving forward?
So that is kind of yet to be established. There is a research paper aspect to this. However, we kind of need to figure out how to go through the process of publishing it. Me and Emily are going to work through that, I think, together.
It will be something that moves forward. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But yeah, if it does get published, you can always, I don't know, find it by searching the topic, potentially searching my name.
Same.
Yeah. Um, and maybe it'll be published through the U Chicago Library as well, or live somewhere in the archive.
We're still looking into where the best home for it might be.
Mhm.
But yeah, I just want to say again, Mia was doing all this research in addition to being a full-time student. So um the paper part of it is we've got a good solid, or Mia has a good solid rough draft, but it's something that we're going to continue refining moving forward. Um as Mia has a little more time to devote to it now that the like research portion of this project is kind of wrapping up. It's the synthesis that we'll work on next. So, yeah. Other questions? We still have about 10 minutes left. Give it a second more. Well, I think if there are no more questions, maybe we can wrap up a little bit early, but this has just been such a fun project. Oh, we have another one. Art therapy and illustration could be a venue. uh, Art therapy and illustration could be a venue for youth for these books? Question. So I think I'm not sure I entirely understand the question, but art therapy and illustration could be a venue for youth. Maybe illustrating identities. Amy, could you restate the question? Illustrating. Okay. Art therapy and illustrating could be a venue for youth for these books. So do you think that could be a way for students to engage with these books?
Yeah, if you mean like venue as in like a physical space in which someone could be engaging in this, yeah, I think that there could be spaces, classes being held that are very queer identity affirming spaces that include activities like illustration or just like talking about these books. Yeah, just like physical third spaces in which people could engage in, yeah, absolutely could foster some form of resilience and empowerment for queer youth.
Yeah, illustration is already like as if you're an illustrator illustrating a book, you read through the text and the illustration is kind of an interpretation of it, right? And so it's an engagement with it. And so yeah, I think that could be a good way to engage with banned books. All right. Do we have any last questions? Final words? If not, I think we can probably wrap up. Thank you, Mia, so much for all of your hard work this quarter and for this fantastic presentation. And I hope you have a fantastic summer, like resting, and then we can come back to this after you've had a little break from it. And thank you, everyone, for attending again on the Friday of exam week, 11 to 12. We know it's not an ideal time for a presentation to attend, and we're thankful for everyone who was able to come. So thank you all, and look forward to some more banned book initiative programming next year, the next school year. Thanks, everyone.